Hello, everyone, and welcome to MEMO in Conversation. Last week, my colleague spoke to Omar Shakir, the Israel and Palestine director at Human Rights Watch, on their latest report, which found Israel to be committing crimes of apartheid against Palestinians. One of the things they spoke about was the very delicate and disturbing situation and reality for Palestinians living in occupied East Jerusalem. And today I have with me a special guest, a Palestinian from Jerusalem, whose family is under threat of being forced out of their home in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in favor of Israeli settlers. Welcome, Rasha.
Thank you, Jihan, and thank you for having me.
Now, to our viewers, if you're not aware of the situation in Sheikh Jarrah by now, this is a neighborhood in occupied East Jerusalem where 28 Palestinian families moved in the 1950s and around 1956 after they were made refugees during the Nakba in 1948, when they were forced out of their homes in historic Palestine to make way for the establishment of Israel. UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, approved and built homes for these families in Sheikh Jarrah in 1956 in agreement with Jordanian authorities who ruled the West Bank and East Jerusalem during that time. But after Israel occupied the Palestinian territories in 1967 and illegally annexed East Jerusalem, Israeli settler organizations started to lay claims of ownership of the land of Sheikh Jarrah and these homes where Palestinians have been living for generations. They've launched legal proceedings to try and evict the Palestinians from there. Now, this has been going on since 1972, and several Palestinian families have already been forcibly removed from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah. Rasha's family is one of a number of Palestinian families facing a forced eviction this year. Rasha, I'll let you paint the picture for our viewers. So can you maybe tell me about your family's situation, how long they've lived in Sheikh Jarrah and how they're doing at the moment with everything that's happening on the ground, and just generally tell me about growing up in Sheikh Jarrah.
Of course, Jihan, and again, thank you for the opportunity to shed some light on what's happening in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of East Jerusalem. As you mentioned, the 28 families currently living in Karm al-Shauni area of the Sheikh Jarrah are actually Palestinian refugee families who had properties, homes, land that were theirs prior to 1948 and the illegal annexation and occupation of Palestine in 1948. And that includes my grandparents, Fuad and Badriya Dajani, may they rest in peace. They lived in a neighborhood called Al-Baqa, and that's for people who are not familiar, it's on the western side of Jerusalem. And in 1948, they, of course, with just like hundreds of thousands of Palestinians had to leave their homes. They were displaced. They spent a year in Jordan as refugees and then in Damascus for a year. Then went back to East Jerusalem, where they lived in rental homes. And of course, you're talking about a married couple with kids. And so they went back to East Jerusalem, lived in rental homes until, as you mentioned, in 1956, the UNRWA and the Jordanian government reached to an agreement where they gave the 28 families the opportunity to basically start over again and build and have a life in Jerusalem. Some of those families come from other parts of historic Palestine, like Jaffa, like Haifa, and other places. But my family, my grandparents were from Jerusalem. So that's the house that my mom grew up in, Samira Dajani, and I say hi to her. And along with her 5 siblings. And she always tells us about the memories, the lovely memories they have and the time they spent with their dad in the garden, especially planting trees and playing in the neighborhood. It was, according to my mom, a very beautiful neighborhood with beautiful relationships between the residents of that neighborhood. So as you mentioned, fast forward after 1956, we started, my grandparents started getting under the pressure of possible threats to displace them once again, because the court started looking into these cases since 1972, as a matter of fact. And the fact that there's a law that was passed by the Israeli occupying government allowing Jews to basically claim property and land that Jews owned prior to 1948 in Palestine, that just gave some committees the nerve to go and falsify documents, and the court unfortunately took them at face value, did not even give us the chance to challenge the authenticity of these documents. And even when the lawyer and other residents of the neighborhood came forward with proof that these are falsified documents, they mean nothing and should mean nothing to the legal procedures, we were just dismissed. And until today, of course, with the lot of developments that happened over the past few weeks, and we were all waiting for a decision to be made yesterday, but of course that got postponed. I just want to tell people that unfortunately, and I know it's a question that always comes up, but why go to Israeli courts? It's not like Palestinians want to do that. We're forced to do that. Although we know that the Israeli legal system is nothing but an extension and an arm that empowers settlers and settlers' greed in our properties and land in Jerusalem and Palestine. But we had no other option but to go there, and unfortunately we're at a stage where they're trying to just stall the whole process, thinking that, oh, the media attention will just cool down, people will not be as excited knowing that it's Ramadan, and people will just get it together. But I'm telling them I see it differently. As long as we know that we have a right, we will keep fighting for it.
But how does it feel? Like, of course, your family was forced out once before in 1948, right? And they had to move time and again until they ended up settling in Sheikh Jarrah. But, how does it feel to, be told by Israeli settlers, you have to leave this home, and to be facing this threat daily, just to be, I mean, we've seen the videos. I'm sure this is nothing new for the Palestinians who live in Sheikh Jarrah, but to the rest of the world, it's absolutely shocking to see, Israeli settlers, saying it on camera, even that if I don't steal your home, and we've seen the video of the settler, with the Kurd family, if I don't steal your home, somebody else will. That's their kind of the justification that some of these settlers are giving. So how does it feel to be met with that kind of arrogance and that kind of disregard to your rights and to your claim to the land and to your, at the end of the day, it is the home that you've lived in for years and years?
Of course, I think as a Palestinian, it's the kind of life you grow up knowing. But that, unfortunately, you come to this world, and the first thing you are facing is an occupation that that touches every bit of your life, every bit of the way you're currently living, your present. Of course, it comes with a lot of history, and again, it also impacts your future. So seeing that video over and over again, and I'm sure it went viral for a reason. It's not new, but that's exactly the mentality that Palestinians have to face and have to deal with. At the end of the day, they know that the establishment of Israel was based on theft. The theft of Palestinian lands and property. It was built on the rubble of Palestinians, Palestinian homes. Unfortunately, you're also talking about massacres. Palestinians were killed, continue to be killed. And just for the justification that this is their land and that they deserve to live here. But what about the indigenous Palestinians who lived there for decades and decades? There's proof that we lived there, and the fact that they come with this mentality, if I don't steal it, someone else would. It just tells you the kind of mentality and arrogance that they come with. And if you notice, the person who was talking to Muna al-Kurd in that video is obviously was not born there. You can tell from his accent where he's coming from. And that's exactly the reality that we have to face, is settlers who have no connection whatsoever or roots to Palestine, and they come arrogantly claiming a land that they never lived in. And especially in the case of the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood and the 28 families, you're talking about 500 Palestinian family members, multi-generations, people who had dreams, who had memories in these homes, who remember nothing and know nothing but this neighborhood and these homes. And they're now having to face a very uncertain future where they will be kicked out on the street. And it happened in 2008 and 2009 to Al-Ghawi and Hanoun families. And they, and to be honest, the videos that have been just reflecting the demonstrations, the protests, and all the instability that is happening in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood is actually incited by settlers who moved into a home in the neighborhood, and they're sitting there and looking at the neighborhood and basically telling us, you're next. And that's something that we're not allowing. And for them, it frustrates them that Palestinians are not surrendering. They're not accepting a brutal and a cruel reality. The fact that you are resisting, the fact that you are demanding your basic rights, a basic right of accommodation and living in the homes that you knew nothing but, that for them is unacceptable, and they would only be pleased if you welcome them into your homes. But for those who are not familiar with the Palestinian cause and the Israeli occupation, I just tell them, just put yourself in those people's shoes. Just imagine yourself living peacefully in your home, raising a family, building memories, and all of a sudden a burglar comes in. Do you welcome them with open arms, or do you fight back? And that's what we're doing, and that's something that they don't want us to do. They want us to basically lay the red carpet and tell them, please move in. Do you want coffee or tea? And that's exactly what we as residents of the Sheikh Jarrah are trying to do, making sure that our voices are heard. We are challenging their threats. We are challenging their greed. And we will continue to do that. And to be honest, the kind of attention that the case received, I hope what's happening in the rest of Palestine and Jerusalem also gets the same attention, because you're talking about in Sheikh Jarrah, it's a strategic location where they want to just kill any possibility of a future Palestinian state. If they take Sheikh Jarrah, it means they will take the whole of Jerusalem, and that's unacceptable for us. It is our capital, and we will keep fighting for that.
You've gone a bit echoey. I'm not sure what's happened, but I can still hear you. But my next question to you is, if the worst does happen, where would your family go? Now, of course, I know that it's out of the question for them to go back to their original homes, before 1948, from, which they were kicked out of, when Israel was established. And obviously, Israel does not recognize the right of Palestinians, the internationally guaranteed right of Palestinians to return to their homes, pre-1948 homes. So what would your family do in this kind of situation?
I must admit that it's a scenario that we try not to think about, and just because we know that our fight is like, our case is a just case, and the fact that these homes are ours and we know nothing but those homes. But as you mentioned, Jihan, Palestinians do not have the privilege or the option to claim homes that they owned pre-1948, because if we do, Israel will no longer exist. As I mentioned, my grandparents' house, it wasn't in West Jerusalem, it still stands. We can pass by it, walk near, but can we claim it back just based on the laws that allow Israelis to do so? Not really. So we try not to think about a possibility where we will be thrown out and have to look at options. We will keep fighting. And I just want to tell you that for these families, Jerusalem is their root, is where they grew up. And Sheikh Jarrah specifically, this neighborhood is everything they know. For Jerusalemites, it's a very hard situation to even maintain your Jerusalem ID. So if, God forbid, these families find themselves out on the street, they will have to probably live outside Jerusalem. And that's not an option if you want to maintain your Jerusalem ID, your status as a resident of Jerusalem. And
this applies only to the Palestinians, correct? The Israeli residents do not have to worry about that.
Oh yeah, for Israelis, you can live abroad for as many years as you wish, and as soon as you step and you return, you are immediately given access to everything as an Israeli citizen. But the discriminatory laws against Palestinians are very clear in all aspects of life. So there's something called the center of life, where Palestinians, only Palestinians, Arabs, have to prove that Jerusalem is their center of life. Otherwise, you lose your status, the ability to pass the Jerusalem ID to your kids, or have access to services, which again, compared to what the Israelis are offered, are nothing. But nevertheless, they are important services like medical care and infrastructure and all of that. So you are found in a situation where also can you build or can you rent a house in Jerusalem? Not really, it's very expensive. Can you ask for a permit and be granted a permit to build? Not really. So you are under a situation where you're being kicked out and given no alternative, no option whatsoever.
And do you know what plans they have for the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah and your home? So, you know, the obviously there's this, you know, legal case that you need to leave by August. Your family needs to leave the house by August, and for it to be taken over by these, you know, Israeli settler organizations. But are you aware of what they have in mind for the neighborhood? Because obviously what we hear about is how obviously there will be new settlements in the neighborhood, or settlers would move in from abroad. So it would be good for you to tell us what you guys know of.
Of course. So according to our information, there's already a scheme plan that was presented and submitted to the Israeli Ministry of Interior, and in place of the current homes, the historic homes of Palestinians, they plan to build 250 settler units. By that, it means bringing people who had no connection, no links, no roots whatsoever to the place, and just live there on the rubble of Palestinian homes, live there on the rubble of Palestinian dreams and memories. And that's the reality. And it's a situation that is not limited to the Sheikh Jarrah or unique to the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood or Jerusalem, but you see settlements, and those are colonial settlements, spreading like cancer across the West Bank. And although there's internationally these settlements and the expansion is illegal, we're seeing very limited, if actually no pressure on Israel, on the Israeli occupying government to stop its settlement expansion and the annexation of Palestinian land. And even just yesterday, I believe their Knesset is looking at actually legalizing the illegal settler posts that were built, 50 of them across the West Bank. So it just tells you that whether it's a judicial authority or their parliament, their Knesset, or the settler organizations, they work all hand in hand. They are working against Palestinians. For them, we're only good if we do not exist. They want us out of the way and to pave the way for settlers to come and move in.
You know, obviously we've seen over the past few weeks, there's been very persistent protests in and around Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem against, you know, these forced evictions. We've seen Palestinians come from other parts of you know, the Palestine, from the West Bank, from within the Green Line, to come and stand in solidarity with the Palestinians of Sheikh Jarrah. So what do you think of sort of the response and sort of the reaction to what's happened, to these court orders and to these sort of forced evictions? Obviously, we now know that the court has delayed and postponed the deadlines that they've given, trying to sort of, I think, go around the sort of the reaction that's taken place. So what do you think of those reactions? I mean, I also know that representatives of families from Sheikh Jarrah, as well as nearly 200 organizations, sent a letter to the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC to sort of include this imminent forced displacement of the families in Sheikh Jarrah in the open investigation of the ICC, where it relates to Israel's commission of, war crimes and crimes against humanity, and in this case specifically, a forcible transfer and the appropriation of property. So what do you think? Do you think that the international community will, take real action to stop what's happening, considering all of this sort of the strong reaction that's taking place in Palestine at the moment?
So let me first just comment on the first part of your question, and that's what is my impression about the kind of reaction that we receive from Palestinians across Palestine. I say typical Palestinian. We're unified regardless and in spite and despite the barriers and the annexation of land and the constant actions that we're seeing on the ground, where they want people in Gaza to be living and secluded and have nothing to do and disconnected from what's happening in the West Bank, and those in the West Bank disconnected from Jerusalemites, the Jerusalemites disconnected from Palestinian residents in the 1948 territories. But it's not happening, especially youth. The reaction, the response, the fear that they have for one another, the compassion, the just feeling for one another. I think it's very typical of us Palestinians, and especially when it involves Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Haram Sharif, our lands in 1967. All of that, it's something that unifies us, and it's just seeing those Palestinian young adults, youth, go out and protest in Al-Ramla, in Al-Lid, in Nazareth, in Haifa, in all those places. Like this is what Palestinians are all about. Yes, we might get distracted by our everyday life commitments, just like anyone else in the world. But when it comes to fighting occupation, we are one body, and that was exactly the case in what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah and across Palestine in the past few days. It's not something new, but it's very heartwarming to see, for sure. As for the international reaction and response, again, rallies and protests and sit-ins and drive-ins even are taking place across the world as we speak, in London, yesterday in Berlin, in Amsterdam, even in Montreal and Toronto in Canada, across the US, different states. And in spite of the pandemic, people are going out, voicing their complete rejection to what's happening to Palestinians, and that's again also heartwarming. Even in Kuwait today, they went out and protested in Yemen. Despite everything that they're going through, they made sure that they stand with Palestine and Palestinians. So that is expected, and this is exactly what people, and this is the kind of solidarity that we see across the board from people. When it comes to governments, it's a different case. I do understand that the statements that were issued did not come easily. I do understand that some of them took way longer than they needed. And even when they were issued, some of them, and of course I can't put them all in one bucket because some were very impressive, others not really. Some were we expected that they would be empty words. But what I really do not understand is the fact that they use the both sides language in those statements, bringing the oppressor and the oppressed as if they were equal. People with nothing but even stones they're not using, like peaceful protesters, worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque are being gassed and they're being brutally attacked just because they wanted to commemorate Ramadan and live the days of Ramadan in peace and worship. Even that, they're not being allowed to do. So those statements, for the most part, just made the oppressor and the oppressed equal, and that's totally unacceptable. Some only managed to issue statements when airstrikes took place and rockets were fired out of Gaza, but the killing of 20 Palestinians and more, including 9 children, went unnoticed. And that just tells you that there's an obvious disconnect between people and governments. But definitely we're seeing a pressure from people. The petition that was and will be submitted today to the Congress, to the State Department, U.S. State Department has over 170,000 signatures. As you mentioned, there was a letter that was submitted to the ICC, endorsed by 91 organizations and growing, asking for including what's happening in the Sheikh Jarrah as part of the larger investigation to into the war crimes committed by the occupying force. Of course, these are all actions that are necessary, that should continue. And at the end of the day, if those governments say that they are democratic and they mean the fact that they are democratic, then they need to start listening to their people, to those who elected them, who brought them to power, and start listening to what they're saying and put the right pressure on Israel and take tangible, solid actions that show Israel that what they're doing will not pass unnoticed. Rather, there will be consequences and they will be accountable for their ongoing killing and atrocities and brutal attacks against Palestinians.
Thank you so much, Rasha. I know this must have been quite difficult to do, considering the situation at the moment and everything your family is facing as well. But before we wrap up our conversation, I want to ask you if there's anything that you would like to say or share.
I just want people to know that their support, their ongoing solidarity is very much appreciated. Trust me when I say that people do get strength from that. It motivates them to keep fighting and keep going. This, as you said, Jihan, this hasn't been easy for especially the residents of Sheikh Jarrah. People now in Gaza may God be with them, and the free voices that we're hearing across Palestine people are being targeted just for demanding basic rights, for not accepting brutal occupation. And I just say, please stay with us, keep doing what you're doing, speak up, educate friends, family members, make sure that you are aware and up to date to what's happening, and put pressure on your governments, your elected members of parliament. Tell them that what's happening is unacceptable, not in your name. That exactly should be the message, not in my name. I don't want my taxes to go to killing Palestinians. I don't want any military aid to go to killing innocent Palestinians. That is something that we need to keep doing, making sure that we're heard. But I'm telling you, people appreciate and know that it's not easy, especially during this pandemic. People are going through a lot, but we're seeing such a heartwarming solidarity across the world that is not going unnoticed. On the contrary, people are actually motivated and keep going because of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rasha. It was an honor speaking with you. And thank you very much to our viewers as well. And we will see you all next week with another MEMO conversation. Take care.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.